kind of violence?
In my opinion, I would think it's remnants of the state security, because this organization has been doing this behavior for the past 30 years. They have been promoting sectarian violence and problems between Copts and Muslims. And so I would suggest that now, as they are being attacked by the revolution and the people who are asking for the solution of this organization, now they are attacking for the last time. So they are trying to induce some sectarian problems and violence.
And how worried are people? I mean, given what's happened and the violence and the deaths and so on, tell me what Copts, I mean, you're a Copt, tell me what people are saying in your community.
In the community, in the district where we went this morning, people were a bit scared because they heard that the thugs are threatening to re-attack them again tonight. So they are a bit scared. We gave them some medical supplies from many people from the youth who initiated the revolution. They gathered some medical supplies to help them. And the army also is present there. But the army situation is a bit ambiguous because it's not protecting them.
OK, Dr. Mina Gerges, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. Troubling times for you there. Thank you. Now, anti-government protesters in Yemen remain defiant despite the death of at least one man. Protests have swelled in the capital on Wednesday. It follows Tuesday night's violence when security forces opened fire on a crowd of demonstrators outside Sana'a University. Student protesters, mainly, have been camping in front of the university since mid-February. In Côte d'Ivoire, 4 people have been shot dead during protests in the commercial capital, Abidjan. Chaos broke out in the suburb of Tricheville on Tuesday. Witnesses claim that government forces opened fire on a crowd. They were marching against President Laurent Gbagbo. The protesters back Gbagbo's presidential rival, Alassane Ouattara. Police in Mauritania have beaten and arrested several protesters. The demonstration on Tuesday in the capital Nouakchott was organised by a local youth movement. Demonstrators want more political freedom. They're also demanding that the president who came to power in a coup in 2008 should go. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for attacking a funeral procession in northwest Pakistan. At least 37 people have been killed and 100 others have been injured. Kamal Haider reports.
It became a race to save the lives of those caught by the bomb's deadly blast. The victims had been taking part in a funeral procession. Now it was a procession of wounded to hospital. Some would live, but many would die. This attack was cruel even by Pakistani standards. The attacker, a young boy, said to have been wrapped in a shawl. Just as the crowd prepared to pray, he detonated his bomb. The main target, the leadership of the anti-Taliban militiamen in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, a volunteer fighting force organized by the government in its long-running war against the Pakistani Taliban. They've been targeted before. 2 years ago, the head of the force was killed in a bomb attack. The Pakistani Taliban may be feeling some pressure here. However, almost every week, they remind the government in Islamabad that they remain a potent force in Pakistan. Kamal Haider, AlJazeera, Islamabad.
Now, more on the Libyan uprising. Let's head over to Stephen Cole in London, who has more details of the private jets that have taken off from Tripoli and would seem to be on a round of diplomacy. Stephen?
That's what it seems to us to be, Lauren. The jets were carrying senior representatives from Gaddafi's government and landed in Egypt, Portugal and Belgium. It's thought to be part of a diplomatic blitz by the Libyan leader in order to avoid more international action. So the first plane took off from Tripoli and landed in Cairo. Sources there are telling us talks will allegedly take place with the Arab League. The second plane left Tripoli and stopped briefly in Malta. Now, reports suggest it then proceeded to Lisbon, and Portugal's foreign minister is expected to meet with Gaddafi's emissary. After a brief stop in Paris, a third plane then headed to Brussels. Our sources understand talks could be held with the EU and with NATO. And we're told the delegate who's been sent to Paris could well be from the NLC and may well meet with President Sarkozy. Baroness Ashton, of course, has told EU MPs today that Gaddafi should be sent back into the cold. So that's revealing the EU's hand. Let's go to Brussels now, and Alan Fisher. What are you hearing in Brussels, Alan?
Well, clearly, Stephen, this is a fast-moving situation. No one expected these planes to take off, and they were first reported on Twitter. That set everyone looking to find out where they were heading. As we heard, one landed in Egypt, one has gone to Paris and then on to Brussels, and the third one, we understand, is in Portugal. Now, NATO was going to meet on Thursday. Libya obviously top of the agenda. One of the things that they were going to discuss is whether or not to impose a no-fly zone. Certainly Colonel Gaddafi would want to try and stop that if at all possible. That is why we're seeing perhaps these diplomatic efforts. We're hearing within the last hour or so suggestions that Libyans may have been invited to Brussels for these talks by the White House. That's still yet to be confirmed, but that would certainly be an interesting development if that was the case. But as we've heard from the White House and also from other European leaders such as David Cameron, they are suggesting that Muammar Gaddafi cannot stay in power. So it poses a very interesting question of what exactly the Libyans are here to do, what they're here to negotiate, and who will be speaking to them.
Well, exactly. That's the point, isn't it? I mean, first of all, Baroness Ashton says that Gaddafi should be sent back into the cold. Then she says it's not within her mandate to recognise any rebel government. And a National League, a National Libyan Council want recognition from the EU, so that's not going to happen. But this delegation, let's make it clear, this delegation from Libya is a pro-Gaddafi delegation.
Well, certainly that's the suggestion that we're hearing, that it's come from Muammar Gaddafi. It was cleared through airspace in Malta. So it would suggest that perhaps Muammar Gaddafi believes he can influence the discussions of NATO on Thursday and then the EU leaders in Brussels on Friday, because, of course, NATO can put in place contingency plans if the political leaders then decide what they want to do next with Libya. And it is the meeting on Friday that would suggest that the EU will direct a large part of what NATO does next. One thing to point out very clearly, though, is that Barack Obama, in previous speeches and again in the last few days, David Cameron, who has been perhaps among the most hawkish of the European leaders, the British Prime Minister, has in the last few days suggested that any action in Libya has to be approved, first of all, by the United Nations. And we know that the Russians aren't terribly keen on the idea of a no-fly zone. So there's still a lot of work to be done. But it's interesting at a time when Muammar Gaddafi perhaps feels that he's gaining the upper hand militarily in Libya with success in various places that he claims, that he is now moving a diplomatic offensive, particularly against the big players of NATO and the EU, who meet within the next 48 hours to put his case and suggest that perhaps their words of saying he should go were premature. OK,
thanks very much indeed, Alan. And, of course, it was the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, who pitched the idea of a no-fly zone. Catherine Ashton, as I said earlier, told EU MPs it was time to send Gaddafi back into the cold after Tony Blair had brought him in from the cold.